Kia ora tātou. Ko sō nawa tere tēnei, he uri no te tai rāwhiti no Ngāti Porou. Kei konei hoki Niki Hākor, he uri no Waikato Tainui. Ko wai mātou, we are senior researchers with Manaaki Taiao, a rōpū of Manaaki Whenua, Lanky Research, Kairangahau Māori or Māori researchers, working on kaupapa Māori and vision mātauranga informed research projects within a number of our science portfolios in Manaaki Whenua. The team brings a range of skills, economics, planning, ecology, pathology, and we work with iwi and Hapu and communities to develop strategic planning, policy, and monitoring tools informed by mātauranga Māori and science to support kaitiakitanga. So today, Niki and I will present a Māori agribusiness case study that showcases the operation of He Waka Taurua, the double-hulled canoe, a framework for collaborative partnership based on the dual elevation of both mātauranga Māori and Western science knowledge systems to inform decision makers to achieve sustainable and enduring livelihoods. Kia te mātauranga Māori. So what is Māori knowledge? Mātauranga Māori or kaupapa Māori perspectives recognise that people are intimately connected to ecosystems, to Te Ao Māori, natural environment. This connection is founded on whakapapa, genealogical connection, and it also recognises that Te Ao Māori has an intrinsic value, a mana, the value of something in and of itself, irrespective of the values ascribed by humans. And the natural environment has the power to provide us, humans, with the benefits to live our lives. And at the same time, there's an acknowledgement that in order to look after the environment, practices like kaitiakitanga or sustainable resource management are required in order to ensure that livelihoods are available not only for us, current generations, but for future generations as well. So this whakaaro provides the lens for a Māori approach to ecosystem management. As Indigenous people, and within the current context, it requires us to empower and equalise the Māori worldview, values, and knowledge systems. We need to move away from a dominating Western paradigm where Māori perspectives are present, but are often unequally considered, if at all. And we also need to be aware that in some instances where Māori knowledge and values are present, they are currently housed within a Western paradigm. However, for a holistic and unique land management paradigm to work in Aotearoa, we need to ensure that we have two equal-sized cogs in the wheel that are not needing to be validated against each other. And this needs to be reflected across the whole spectrum of land management, from governance through to decision-making on the ground, and the implementation and support of our people in those spaces. So here's the Waka Taurua framework. In this framework, it shows that values and perspectives must be considered carefully where collective decision-making arrangements like co-governance between Indigenous people and government institutions are encouraged. As such, there's a need to recognise Indigenous values within land management practices. An additional challenge is how to better coordinate these values into management and policy. We can either attempt to assimilate ill-fitting values into universalistic frameworks or develop management and valuation frameworks that consider worldviews equally from the outset. To address this complex issue, as part of the Sustainable Seas National Science Challenge, we developed a He Waka Taurua, a temporary double-hull canoe as a metaphorical framework where Indigenous values and broader societal values can be considered in a balanced way, either individually or together to achieve the common purpose of healthy ecosystems and healthy land management. So the development of He Waka Taurua is informed by an Aotearoa experience of co-governance and co-management models. I'll explain in brief each component of the framework, from the whāinga or the common purpose, that's the net, the kupenga, which usually is on focusing on restoring the well-being of our land-based resources. The shared values of Māori society and the broader society are the wholes, and the diverse planning tools and approaches used by kaitiaki and planners are the hoi or the paddles. Its flexibility for application to a multitude of contextual issues is represented by the moana, and as such, disaster recovery or polluted waterways or land management practices It can be considered within this context. And the deck or the papa noho is where the two parties reconcile power sharing, worldviews, and developing capacity. So the next set of slides will be led by Nikki, and she will demonstrate how this type of approach was applied in a Māori agribusiness case study with Māori landowners.
Tēnā tātanga mihi o te rā, ko Nikki Harcourt tōku ingoa, he uri aho no Waikato. We've recently completed a project working with Maori partners to co-develop a decision-making framework for selecting alternative afforestation opportunities. I'm going to reflect on some of our key learnings about how a partnership approach to developing frameworks and the implementation of natural resource management strategies can empower more resilient livelihoods. Our project partners were the Committee of Management for Puawai Station, a 560 plus hectare farm, currently leased for sheep and beef grazing. Many of the trustees and shareholders of Puawai live outside of their whenua. Our partners have told us that this is because there are few opportunities to generate equitable livelihoods. And this has led to progressive disconnection of uri from the mātauranga relating to their whenua, and the trustees are seeking to change this. The 150 plus shareholders for the station all whakapapa to Ngāti Porou. So Whakatauai Station is located in Ruatoria in the Waiapu Valley of the East Coast. Those of you who are familiar with the area will know that it's geographically fairly isolated, being about 1.5 hours drive up the coast from Gisborne. Numerous historic reports tell us how prosperous Maori settlements were at first contact. Ngāti Porou uri have been in the Waiapu for around 600 years. And in 1840, it was recorded that something like 90% of the catchment was natural forest, and small clearings had been made to enable food cultivation, kumara and taro being key crops. Cultivation was tightly matched to the most appropriate microclimates on the whenua, and activities were undertaken in reciprocity with te taiao, the environment. This philosophy lent itself to mosaics of activity across the landscape. But since the late 1800s, there's been active encouragement by government through schemes and incentives to clear the forest and convert the land into pastoral farms. This has led to primary production in areas that are frankly unsuitable, with associated negative impacts on surrounding natural systems and receiving environments. For the Maori communities of the Waiapu, deforestation has led to increased erosion and sedimentation of the waterways, loss of biodiversity, and has had a profound impact on cultural values and their enactment. So one of the realities facing land blocks is that there are multiple people involved in decision making, and this is by virtue of multiple ownership. Our older trustees tend to adopt quite a conservative approach to land use activities. Sheep and beef is what they've known, and they like to stick with what they've known. But there's a new wave of trustees stepping up. These new trustees do not want to be reliant on farm advisors to tell them what their options are, or indeed the way that knowledge should be used to inform decision making. As Sean's mentioned, we have a core cluster of kaupapa Māori researchers at Manaaki Whenua, and one of our strengths is that we share a worldview with our Māori partners. And we also have our own technical subject expertise. For example, in this particular project, pedology, ecology, plant bioactives, and economics. So, in early discussions with our partners, we recognise that utilising place-based tohu or indicators that can be observed in the landscape, like the presence of buttercup and wet soils, will empower landowners to read the landscape and make decisions without being reliant on advisors and Eurocentric ways of knowing and doing. Our team recognised that utilising mātauranga-based tohu alongside biophysical spatial data enables more holistic land use assessments. So this case study is very much the story of a trust reasserting Maori ways of thinking about how to transform a pastoral grazing unit into a system that is in keeping with their values and aspirations. To understand why the current land use does not deliver on their aspirations, it's necessary to understand what those are. We engaged in a series of interactive workshops to understand the landowners' aspirations, perspectives and priorities for their whenua in terms of potential land use opportunities. And together we co-developed a model for utilising cultural values to inform their land management decisions. The current land use activity, pastoral grazing, does not deliver on the aspirations of the shareholders and governance because the current environmental state is poor, with low biodiversity and disconnection of the shareholders from their ancestral land. So we established an inclusive and participatory approach and equally valued each partner's contribution to our framework. As a starting point, we presented our partners with the Maori values framework earlier developed by Awatiri and others. And you can see that it's based on 3 core values: whakatipurawa, growing the asset base; manaakitanga, the more reciprocal type considerations; and kaitiakitanga, sustainable management. The impact of an activity on these values helps trustees to rank potential activities. It should also be noted that individual groups will define what these values mean for them and how they prioritise them. So we walked the land with the trustees and shared knowledge about biophysical observations, cultural significance, and sites of special meaning. And we discussed potential economic returns from undertaking different activities according to biophysical and cultural feasibility. Place-based knowledge is essential in terms of understanding the intricacies of the microenvironments and what may be successful there. The project meetings and workshops took place primarily at the case study site. This included a mixture of informal discussions and more formalised sessions with semi-structured questions. An advisory group of ecological subject experts were engaged to ensure that the scientific modelling was robust. We also held a teleconference call with trustees and shareholders that couldn't meet on site. They were able to mark significant sites on a shared map of the case study site. This was particularly successful in terms of being able to draw out knowledge, but also for us to understand appropriate places to site plants and appropriate species combinations based on mātauranga. So here is the case study block itself. It was a 10-hectare area with 3 distinct soil types. And as indicated, the site has many areas of special significance to the uri. So thinking about how visual observations about what we can see in the landscape can help guide our decision making, here is an example of a gley soil, a type of soil found in wet areas. Now from mātauranga, the trustees knew that kumara was never grown in the pale coloured soils. From technical knowledge, we know that pale soils are nutrient devoid. We also know that they are waterlogged, and of course the kumara would have rot if they had been planted there. Together we could see the pale soils and we could see the association of certain plants like the wiwi, the rushes and the buttercup with them. So our final framework enabled us to align the 2 knowledges around the value domains, and this resonated with the trustees. So how does the framework help facilitate decision making? Once we've identified the biophysical attributes of the site and known history about what has grown there in the past, we're able to rank a list of plant species according to their perceived impacts on biodiversity, erosion, and environmental vitality, or mauri. The potential to reconnect uri with traditional ways of utilising the plants, such as rongoa or raranga, and the potential to stimulate economic income streams, and particularly according to intergenerational timeframes. So if we're thinking about wet soils and we see manuka, harakeke and other species grow well in those zones, we can make decisions about our planting plan itself. For example, manuka is a taonga species and was part of the ancestral landscape of Whakatauwai Station. It generates high value honey and oil, but a manuka monoculture was deemed less attractive to the trustees than a mix of manuka and other rongoa species, because this scenario created more biodiversity and would also enable local supply of plant-based medicines and development of a sustainable plant extract business. By enabling the trustees to evaluate the alternative land uses against their core values and principles, they were able to conclude that the loss of revenue from retiring some of the blocks for planting and the costs associated with this, such as fencing, weed and pest control, and planting itself, was offset by the long-term benefits of environmental mitigation. In the mid to long term, this activity will facilitate wānanga workshops to transfer knowledge regarding traditional plant use. It may provide an opportunity for both current learning and a resource for future generations. It has the potential to support high levels of community involvement, for example, in plant propagation and harvesting. So re-establishing the connections between Whakatauwai Station shareholders and their whenua, ancestral knowledge, customary protocols and language is key to revitalising the health of the land and her people, taking a partnership approach to farm planning, incorporating the technical wisdom of conventional farm advisors and scientific methods alongside a kaupapa Māori assessment, offers exciting possibilities for sustainable agribusiness through creating mosaics of land uses that are more resilient and prosperous. So we'd now like to invite you to ask us some questions.
Oh, kia ora, Sean and Nikki. I think your audience was mesmerised with your presentation because we're yet to get any questions, but I'm sure they are working on getting some through now. So just to remind our audience, it's not often we have two of our senior researchers who are so heavily involved in Mātauranga Māori research. So it's a good chance for you to get them to answer anything that's top of mind. And I'll just give you a few minutes to get those in.
You're welcome to email us after the fact too. Yes,
definitely. So you will all receive a follow-up email in about an hour's time with a link to the recording, which you're welcome to share, as well as the email addresses for both Sean and Nikki if you wanted to follow up anything specifically with them.
We do have some publications to provide some further info. For example, the Waka Taurua framework is available currently, and we are drafting up some of the findings from what were presented today and have submitted to a journal. Nikki might be able to provide some more details on that.
Cool. So Phil's asked us a question. He said, it sounds like great mahi. Are you looking at rolling this out anywhere else?
So to answer your question, Phil, I'm also the Te Ao Māori lead for Whiriwhiri Ora, which is the Land Use Opportunities National Science Program, our Land and Water. So this is something that we're actually picking up on in the National Science Challenge.
There are some probably challenges for us, if I could just follow up, in that our focus for Manaaki Whenua is really to provide the frameworks and overarching tools and processes to be able to utilise by others. We don't necessarily get involved in some of the consultation work. I think we'd like to do more work like this with iwi and Hapu, with Māori landowners. But at this stage, in terms of Manaaki Whenua business, our primary focus is on developing these frameworks, developing these models, and then socializing them more generally.
Well, the questions are rolling in now. We've had someone ask, would you do anything differently in hindsight?
That's a tough one.
You can say no.
Yeah, so my immediate reaction is really successful experience, and I was really lucky in my part because it dovetailed into the role that I have in the National Science Challenge, which actually we are looking at different areas in Wairoa, for example, and Aotearoa as well. So yeah, no.
Cool. So we have another. Did you find that all Mātauranga Māori had a match in Western tech, or were there some areas that were completely separate knowledge?
Yeah, I think that your care should be taken when framing that type of question or whakaaro. And I think that a useful approach to take is where the points of alignment, so that the explanation I was giving with respect to Mātauranga Māori is that Mātauranga Māori has its own philosophical traditions, its own way of valuing the world or validating worldviews and perspectives. So what the Waka Taurua framework provides us with is a process for how do we bring together knowledge systems and at the same time recognise the validity of Mātauranga Māori knowledge system. And what Nikki had presented to us is a model or a framework that actually brought together some of the techno-scientific approaches in terms of ecology alongside the values or the principles from a whakaaro Māori perspective. So that was on more of an overarching kind of general type of framing. Is the framing of the kaupapa of the project was underpinned by those ethics, whakatipu rawa, kaitiakitanga, sustainable resource management, and manakitanga around reciprocity. And that provided the overarching context for giving direction to what the science, what the economics needed to respond to, rather than to take a techno-scientific lead first in terms of, for example, an agribusiness focus would tend to focus more on stocking rates of various units of animals, and taking more of a landscape-based approach, which was traditionally in terms of the contextual Mātauranga Māori, utilised based on our historical information that Nikki had collected in terms of those mosaics across the landscape. So there's two different sets of information, the principles and the ethics, kaitiakitanga, for example, and then the applied practice in terms of examples of where Mātauranga Māori or the Māori worldviews really in general were applied. So Mātauranga Māori it can be quite broad. It doesn't have to be specifically tied to traditional ecological knowledge or to environmental knowledge.
Quite a good question come in. So working in a regional council and acknowledging we likely need to change our models of practice, could we work in similar ways as advisors rather than researchers?
Yeah, we've got some good questions today.
Yeah. If you guys want some time to think on that, we can always come back. I've got all the contact email addresses of people who ask these questions. It's quite a juicy one.
It is, I think, well, within council, you do have a statutory role in order to meet your obligations in terms of your business units. And I think guidance ought to be taken from the plans or the business plans around potentially engaging with iwi and Hapu for a specific strategic purpose. But then at the same time, if there are those memorandums of understanding that have more kind of legislative, more mandates in terms of engaging with iwi and hapu and potentially collaborating with iwi and hapu to address an issue, then I think there's more clarity around what role of an official is. Otherwise, I think without that that clarity in terms of what your role is, you're going in there almost ad hoc or on a volunteer basis. I think there's still a role for that type of approach, but I think it's easier, if there's clarification around in terms of the strategy for your business unit, or in terms of the strategy for the process or the plan that you're dealing with at the time in terms of what your role is. And it may be that if the parameters are set correctly from the starting point in terms of a project or a new planning paradigm that's been developed, then that is useful in terms of identifying what your role is there to do in terms of providing techno-scientific information to help support iwi and hapu collaborate or participate in that co-governance type of space. But at the same time, I think it's really important that we have alongside the council officials, the council advisors, Mātauranga Māori advisors as well, to help inform that part of the equation, that part of the waka. Because if we focus our resources on one part of that waka, one whole, and not enough on the other whole, what tends to happen is that your waka will go around in circles instead of working together collaboratively, all paddling together in time in unison to achieve that shared outcome.
Kind of carrying on from that, do you have any advice on how to initiate communication with hapu and iwi?
Wow, that's a
tough one.
That's a very technical question. So within council processes, I would probably defer to the Māori engagement leads within each of most local governments do have those folks that are part of the Māori strategic planning unit, or there might be a special engagement unit. I would defer to what their tikanga is, what their policies are, what their approaches are, because each rohe throughout the country, each area throughout the country has its own dynamics, its own politics. And so I wouldn't want to provide some generalized advice around how you would go about doing that. There's various stages of iwi and hapu at different levels of recognising their mandate, the engagement with local government, the engagement with the Waitangi Tribunal claims processes, and it all creates those dynamics around who are the mandated iwi authorities in a particular area. So not knowing the different contexts from where officials are coming from, it's difficult to provide that very specific advice around who you ought to deal with. So I would therefore defer back to the engagement teams within each of your respective institutions to provide guidance on how to proceed.
Okay, so last question.
In general, I would just add, look at your role as an official to help empower iwi and hapu to better participate in natural resource management governance or natural resource management in general.
Thanks, Sean. So last question, this is for you, Nikki, and it's a bit lighter. How did the co-design approach impact the delivery timeframe?
Because we're experienced at co-development, we already allowed for a reasonable length of development. So I guess that's where experience pays off. I've seen a lot of researchers in my time come unstuck because they have unrealistic expectations about timeframes when you're genuinely partnering with others. So hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, that's perfect. Hey, thanks so much, Sean and Nikki, for giving up your time today. I'm sure if you could hear the audience right now, they'd be clapping for you. in about an hour, you'll all receive an email with some information. Feel free to share that round. The recording will also be available on YouTube should you want to watch it again or share that with anyone. But other than that, thank you for joining us today, and look out for future invites for other webinars that Manaki Whenua offer.
Kia ora koutou.